one fair county in Ireland, with memories so glorious and grand, where nature has lavished its bounty, is the orchard of Erin's green land.
Is this working, please?
Yeah.
Lovely. Somebody kill the lights there. Thanks, Barbara. My name is Felix Rafferty, and I'm proud to say that I'm Vim Rafferty's son. And this has been very difficult for me to do. But Barbara asked, and you don't say no to Barbara. So, put him off to this one. My father was born in 1926, and he died on the 30th of December, coming from Tommy John's funeral. That is where he was coming from the evening that he died. So can we go? My glamorous assistant is my wife here. God help her. So there's my father. This one here we reckon is about 10, so it's about 1936. And the other one was in the early 80s. We reckon it's about 1982. That was just typical of my father's dress. He didn't really dress as a milkman. I saw him once in a shop coat, once, because I think our ma down Creamy said you had to deliver a shop coat. So he did once, and then that was the end of that. So, glamorous, next one please. So, let's look at the history of selling milk. And I know lots of people in here do know the history of selling milk, but as I keep telling people, humans shouldn't be able to drink milk because they don't have the enzyme to break it. Pat, you'll not be too pleased to hear that if you're not going to buy milk like. But this is more or less a potted history. That's not going to last long. This is more or less a potted history of the milk in the area. So people had their own cow. Barbara told me that they had their own Jersey cow called. That's not, well, that wasn't very good. Or they maybe had a neighbour that swapped something for milk, or they just did without milk. There was very few food tolerances then. So then customers, and I've changed the word to customers because people then paid for the milk. They bought unpasteurised milk, so it came from a cow, from a local dairy. And as far as I know, I've done my research here, I can only find two. Teresa's McGill at the corner, they had a dairy, we had a dairy, we're talking about the 1920s, and I can't find any other ones in the past. Does anybody know of any other ones? Where was he?
Poyntzpass.
Oh, Poyntzpass, but we were just, the metropolis of Poyntzpass, we were just at it. Thanks. Right? So, then, the next thing is that the thing that they put it in their own can, so there was a ladle or a measure, and you got it and you put it in your own can. The customers then bought pasteurised milk. It was then sent to the dairies. This was about the 1950s. So they bottled it for the people who sold it in their own bottles. We have one bottle left, and there's a picture of it coming up later on. And then Armagh down went to their own bottles, and we have one bottle of that was dug out of a hedge, and there's a big mark through it because the JCB hit it. So then, where did all the milkmen go? Well, when I was discussing this with Barbara the other day, milkmen died because of shops, and shops were the sort of the thing that stopped milkmen, because they sold it in plastic cartons as lost leaders. So that is where that came from. And now today, 2021, everybody more or less buys their milk from the supermarket. So when did the Raffertys arrive in Poyntzpass? I'm the same Rafferty as Pat. Maybe Pat doesn't want to claim that, but I'm the same Rafferty. We came from Tonlacross, and further back we come from the Summon. So this is Felix Rafferty, and he was married in, that's my grandfather, that's Pat's uncle. He was married on the 20th of the 9th, 1923 by his brother. Now, typical Catholic family in the early 1920s, there was a nun, Sister Angela, there was a priest, Father Thomas, there was a cattle dealer, Felix Rafferty, there was a farmer, Johnny Rafferty, and there was other sisters. So they came to Poyntzpass in 1923 up in 38 Church Street. There's Poyntzpass roughly in the 1920s. I was walking up the street today with Barbara and I said, well, you'd hardly get up as handy then. So you can see there's very few cars. Again, if you look at this one here, that's Church Street. And there is a report that my grandfather sat under that tree on a Sunday and counted the number of cars that were up the street. And it was rare that it got into double digits. So that's Church Street. Again, it's easy, you'll recognise. There's your house. There's the square and Railway Street. And those were more or less the three streets that the Raffertys did their milk run in. Those were more or less the three streets. So there we are back, that's 38. Now again, I don't know who this is. I know that's Felix Rafferty, my grandfather. I know that's my father. Would anybody have any inkling who that gentleman would be?
John McSherry.
What McSherry would that be?
Could be
This McSherry or Paddy McSherry's?
Paddy McSherry's father, perhaps?
We don't know. It's very sad that we have that photograph and we don't know. So Felix Rafferty came 1923. He met in, we don't really notice, he had a bad leg. And I think he wore calipers. I think if you look carefully, he wore calipers. I believe he had polio. And he was a cattle dealer. He couldn't really work that well. He was a cattle dealer and he sold milk from the rear of 38. In 1956, so let's see, maybe go back one. My father had one sister, that was Una. She was the elder of the two. And my father, he was born in 1926. They sold milk to the village. Really only Railway Street, Church Street and Meeting Street. But if you go back, it was a different Poyntzpass than it was today. There was a very different Poyntzpass. There was no Ottern Park. More or less the Church Street stopped at Jim Lennon's. Meeting Street more or less stopped at, well, I'd call it Tommy McComb's. There wasn't really much, there was only the pub after that. Railway Street and William Street was more or less the same, and Chapel Street was more or less stopped at Murray Trainer's house, and there wasn't that many houses in it. So it was a totally different village, it was a totally different way of selling milk. So can we go there? So my father married Rose Garvey from Ballinalack in 1956. There's none in here because it's hard to tell about maths. In 50 years of working, and there's another man we'll talk about in a minute, he didn't have that many days off, but for his wedding and his honeymoon, I think he had 3 days off. That's what he got. So in 1956, he married Rose Garvey from Ballinalack, and they had 4 children. There was Roisin, Una, me, and brother John. And if you go back just one, my father had only 3 passions in life. The first one was the family, and that was the really thing that he loved. The second one, so we'll go to the family. So there they all are. They're not here tonight because loads of different reasons. The second one he had was GAA football. My father was fanatical. As Frank would have told you, like, he did actually stop delivering milk to Lennon's when they won the All-Ireland, didn't he? He did, right? Annie McSherry, who was a down woman from Ballyvarley, used to torment him whenever Down had won a match by putting the Armagh flag in the bottle, and he refused to lift it. There wasn't much logic there, like, but so there's a team from the 50s. My father started following football in the 40s, just after his mother died, and his biggest day, I suppose, ever in football, if you go again please Claire, was that one. And that's his son John winning player of the Sigerson, which is the University's Cup. And that was, we'll get back onto that later on in a wee minute, but that was on a Saturday, and I'll try to explain how hard it was for him to get there on a Saturday. So can we go again? And Pat, you'll recognise this one again. You're picked out here, Pat, because you're in the back row. There's my father delivering milk. That is the only photograph I could find. That's the only one. And that's going up, sorry Pat, it's not your house then, that's going up to Bill Fisher's up in Tullnacross. And you can see, my father had an art of carrying, he never really used the crate, he used his arm. And on the first row he had 5 bottles, and on the second row he had 4 bottles. 3, 2 and 1, he carried 10 bottles at a time. And then the empties went in the other hand. You can see that there's the van. We're going to talk about his vans later on. His vans were very important. They were the means by which he delivered the milk. And you can see there was a sunroof and all put in it because that is where he lived. And that was no joke. The only thing I was noticed about that, he didn't have a cigarette. And my father was a prolific cigarette smoker. And you would rarely have seen him without a cigarette. So those are the 3 things that he enjoyed. 1 was family, 2 was the GAA, and 3 was milk, and the milk was a lot. So where did this milk business of his come from? Well, in the 1920s, it's still there to this day, there was a 4-cow bar at the back of 38, and Felix Rafferty bought cows and milked them and sold the milk to the people of Church Street, Meeting Street, Railway Street. So that was where it all started. My father would have delivered that, and his sister would have helped as well as that. So in 1947, Felix Rafferty died at the age of 58. I think, Frank, you remember that day that he died, yeah? Frank remembers the day in 1947 that Felix Rafferty died, and he had built a new 8-cow bar just to the rear of 38. There was a field beside it, and again, he was going to try to branch out and be a bit bigger. But Felix Rafferty never saw that bar finish. So, in the 1950s, my father became a big, probably quite a big dairy farmer in the day. He would maybe, what would he have, Pat? 8 to 10 cows.
Yeah.
That was fairly big in his day, I suppose. So, he had, in the 1950s, he had 8 to 10 cows in this new 8-cow bar. And he also did the poultry farming as well. He kept chickens, and he also did the milk deliveries. So he was a sort of a diverse farmer. From about 1966, 1967, due to circumstances which were all beyond his control, he more or less lost all his cows due to disease. So he didn't have the cows anymore. And then he tried to buy some land which he didn't get. So all of those things made a difference to him. Now, as we sit here, I want you to go back to the 1950s. There wasn't that many cars. And I can remember just out on the other side of this wall, Jerry Hudson milking cows. You remember that, Pat?
Yeah, yeah.
And Jerry Hudson took them from where Rory Gaffney has the car station. He walked them down the street every day. Do you remember that, Helene?
No, I'm not that old.
I thought you were going to tell me you remember Jerry was born. So he did do that, didn't he, Pat? I remember them coming down. So they would have walked from the Newry Road down to here and back up to the Newry Road up to Rory Gaffney's. So it didn't happen. So 1966, due to circumstances changed with him, he had only the milk delivery and other employment, and those other employments were working for the likes of Griff Wiley and other people around the town that needed help. In the 1970s, things got a bit better, and he was a milkman only. So can we go again? So there you can see a different era. This was not so long ago. This was in the paper. You know, the houses, again, they weren't the poultry houses that we have today, but those were the houses. There's me standing beside a cow in the bottom of the field. It's just 200 metres that way. And again, you can see the cows were a different sort of animal than they are today. They're much smaller. And again, it was a relaxed farming compared to the day, I suppose. Pat, would that be at Arthur Campbell's there, we reckon? That's the bottom one.
I don't think so. Well, bottom one.
Or is it the field? Is it the field next door of Jim Clark's, looking into our house?
Couldn't say.
Right. Well, I couldn't say that. So as you can see, it was a different era in the 19. There's Billy McClellan now, the patrol. You're not coming time like everybody else, McClellan, no? Must have sent for the neighbours, really.
You never stopped in the teacher job. You never stopped in the teacher.
No, you don't. You better watch yourself. You'll get it as well. Right, so you can see in the 1950s, there's the two girls. There's my sister Rosie and my father. He, in the 60s, early 60s, he was really into his cows and trying to get the best out of his milk. And his milk was sent to Armagh Down. It was also bottled for him, but then those bottling plants stopped bottling just for individuals, and Armagh went on their own. So here's the origins. Felix and Sarah Rafferty sold milk from 38. It was unpasteurised. Wouldn't get away really with it today. From a horse and cart. And again, I was talking to Barbara that day. This was the same cart that Tommy Morrow stole the wheels off, right? And then they found them up for Henri Kennedy's new house is. So my father sold unpasteurised milk from a bicycle, and because he was getting further and further afield, he got an engine in it. So it was more or less a rally bike with an engine in it. And then he developed on a wee bit more to his vans. But then he was selling milk in his own bottles, but that disappeared because people wouldn't give the bottles back or they broke them. And then it was too dear to have your own bottles, and that's why Armagh had their own bottles. So pasteurised milk from Armagh in their own bottles, and they delivered it on the street, usually every morning about 6:45. Go ahead, please. Now, some of you might remember that. Yeah. That is the milk house. We have a story about that one when we come near the end. That milk house was a cool room, a big fan on it as food science improved. It had to be cooled. It wasn't allowed to be left outside of the road, so it was put in there in the cool room, and then the cool room was done away with, and there was a big walk-in fridge. So there was a walk-in fridge in there as well. So what did my father sell? Well, at the very start he sold unpasteurised milk. I can safely say whenever we took over the milk run, we never sold any unpasteurised milk, none. Pasteurised full cream milk, probably unfashionable now, unless you're on statins. You can take plenty if you're taking a good glass of milk and 3 statins, you'll be alright. Semi-skim milk, most of you can maybe remember semi-skim milk when you give it to pigs for free, but now you pay $1.10 for 2 litres. Skim milk, that you never want to give to anything, you'll put it down the drain, and now it's trendy. Buttermilk, which is again, later on we're going to see a very famous person that came to our house and bought buttermilk. And yogurt. Now remember, there was none of this sold in the shops. None of it. Right? Yogurt, we used to sell, I'll not say her name, but we used to sell a lot of yogurt to one person. I think she must have bought about 40 pots of yogurt in a week. She never lost any weight, but she always said she was slimming, but she never actually lost any. And then we sold cream. Now cream was one of these strange things because it was very hard to keep fresh, and Barbara would have said that her mother called out. And her mother called out, and my mother would answer the door, she would have said, "Oh, we don't have any." So when my father would arrive home, Mrs. Bess was here for cream. Right. And he went in Uri for the 1 or 2 pots of cream that he needed, so that the customers got what they wanted. And that was always the case. And finally, maybe Hugh, you can interact. Did you ever drink Suki Suncap?
Yes.
How many people here would have drank Suki Suncap? Vile brew. I can't understand why anybody ever drank it. And I can safely say that I can never see and remember my father selling it. He'd give it away. Right? Talk about a lost leader. I can never remember Suki Suncap ever been charged. And here are the 2 bottles that we have. This is the oldest bottle. It's got Churchview Dairy, and we all know it's 38, it's just across from the Church of Ireland. So it's Churchview Dairy, that's what it was always called. It was B. Rafferty, Poyntzpass, please rinse and return. And we have one of them. I'll buy it off. If you have one stuck in a shed somewhere, I'll buy it off you. And here's the other bottle that was a bit later. That's the Armagh bottle. We're now talking about eco-friendly and people being planet-friendly. No plastic, all rinsed and returned. But I can tell you one thing, there were certain houses that we went to, as soon as we got the bottles back off them, they weren't sent back into Armagh, they were put straight into the bin, because they never rinsed them. They were vile. Here we have 2 billheads. The first one is the older one, the second one is from the 70s. My father rarely would have give you a bill. He didn't really, unless you really asked him, you wouldn't really got one. I would give the milk books to the Historical Society, but there was lots of people who might be very embarrassed when they see what was owed by their family members. So that's the reason they're not there. So those are the two billheads. We're reckoning the first one's from the 60s and the next one's from the 70s, 80s. Now, when I look around, I see plenty of customers in here. I see, where's Brian? It's hard to tell where these people are. Where's Brian O'Hara? I knew he was somewhere. I reckon Brian was the furthest family in this room that we delivered milk to in the Leveling ends. That way. Then, if you go south, well, is milk run, Barbara, that looked better when you give it to me.
It did, yeah, you'll have to get
Yeah.
that one with your finger.
Well, Brian's way up here, right? For my mail used in the past, Brian 4.
Yeah.
Right? He also did, actually on the day he died, he was doing another good customer, Desi Rawlings. He lived on the other side of Tandregee. Desi was his next call, never got to it. He went as far as Pat McCourt come in here. Pat McCourt come in at Devlin's. Devlin's was more or less the cut-off point. You know, Devlin's, Sammy Nittles, that was more or less the cut-off point. He went over here, not just as far as Lochgilly, but not far off it. And he went over here on the other side of the A1 dual carriageway. That was as far that way. We reckon, well I reckon, because I checked it one week, he did roughly in the van each week about 1,200 miles. That's how many miles he done a week. Roughly 1,200 miles. He used to buy his petrol in trainers, he used to buy his petrol in Troutons, and it was a fair hefty bill even then. If we're talking the 1980s, it was probably £100 and something a week just for petrol. And the vans never more or less turned off. When they started, it usually started at 7 o'clock in the morning, that van wasn't turned off until it finished. What was his routine? Well, I'd say he got 3 days off for his honeymoon, marriage and honeymoon. In the 50 years that I knew my father, well, I didn't know 50, in the 50 years that he was working, he had how many holidays?
No.
No, one. And there's the man we must thank for it. Francis. 1971, I believe, Francis. 1971, Francis did my father's milk run for 3 or 4 days. What do you think?
It seems longer.
It's a bit like this talk then, right? Well, go back there a minute. So he worked 7 days a week, right? He usually started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he usually quit at 6 o'clock. He usually went up to the house at 10 o'clock to read the GAA papers. He bought 2 of them, and he read them from top to bottom, and he knew everything. So Tuesday was a short day, but he had an afternoon, and he always went to the bank in the afternoon. Tuesday, went in the went to the bank. Wednesday, a long day. Now we're talking from Brian O'Hara's out to the Belfast Road, up to there to the other side of Tandregee, right? On a Thursday, again, short day, but he went to the bank again and probably into the creamery for Lord knows what. Friday was a long day. The reason it was a longer day is you were lifting money, if you got any, right? And it started at 7 to 8. Saturday was a slightly shorter day because again, it didn't go to Brian on Saturday. Slightly shorter day, but from 7 to 6. Now, if there was anything like me, we didn't know how busy this man was because we didn't know. Maybe I was in school in Portadown and I says to him, I've no car today, could you lift me at 4 o'clock? I lifted you at 4 o'clock. So say it was a Wednesday. At 5 to 4 the van trundled into the school and I got into it at 4 o'clock. But I didn't know that he had altered his whole schedule and he wouldn't be home to maybe 8 o'clock. So he altered, and I was only one ask and there was many asks. So those were his days. Now his favourite day of the week definitely was a Sunday, because he used to go to a football match on a Sunday. Lord knows where it would be. It could be anywhere in Ireland. And again, there was 3 people who went with him. One was only working, and the other was Terry Murray. And he always drove. So on a Sunday, they could be anywhere in Ireland and he drove it. Now, they usually, Armagh weren't that good then, so they didn't really go down past the Midlands. But such is life. That's what he did on a Sunday. 7 to 6, I think Trainer's Garage used to wait on him coming in on a Saturday evening because he was the last call to fill her up for Sunday and Monday. He would have filled the van up as nearly every day anyway. So these are the things that he used. The first of all, he started off with a bike. The only one I can ever remember of a bike like that in Poyntzpass was Tom Clark. Tom Clark had a bike like that. Yeah, but my fella had the bike, but it was the more upmarket one that had an engine in it, right? I don't know who sold it, but again, a man that he had a lot of time for was Danny Trainer. Not the Danny Trainer that owned the shop, but the Danny Trainer, would he have been an uncle of his?
Yeah.
Well, Danny Trainer, he said, was one of the best businessmen he ever knew, and he said, I think Danny Trainer died in June 58, and Danny Trainer was a good way of going, and my father bought his vans off Danny Trainer. Now, they were a standard 8 or a standard 10. There's nobody about that can tell me whether it was an 8 or a 10. So we bought his vans off Danny Trainer, and this was about 1955, we reckon, 1954, 55. He had a van, and he was then delivering his milk in the van. As you can see, there's the 2 Morris Minors. My father had 3 Morris Minors, and they were bought locally. They were bought in Joshua White's in Armagh, they were bought in Turkingtons of Lurgan, and they were bought in Donnelly's of Kelvin, and that's where he bought the 3. And these are the other vans that he had. From the 1950s he had a Mini, and the reason that he had a Mini was that to get round the back of our house, the entry is very small. The other vans wouldn't fit round, so the Mini would. So he bought a Mini. Unfortunately, I think he bought that Mini twice, because when he got rid of it, then he realised he couldn't get round the back, so he bought it back again. He bought these closed-in vans. The reason he bought the closed-in vans, I can remember going all over Ireland in a closed-in van, the same colour, Harvest Gold, all over Ireland with Frank McCourt, who wanted to see something, and my father would have took him, and Terry Murray, and he had the closed-in van for the simple reason it stopped the sun getting onto the milk. Fair enough. In the early 80s he bought a Marina pickup, and that was bought in Joshua White's in Armagh, and in 1985 I think because I was helping them then, we bought a Volkswagen Caddy diesel, and I think that was the first Volkswagen Caddy diesel in the north. So again, the diesel made an awful difference to the petrol that was used. So those were the things that he used when the van didn't work. Now, I must say the van sometimes didn't work. And anybody recognise who that is? Correct, a neighbour of yours, right? And Davy John Steele, he would have lent my father his blue Datsun. That shows you how long ago it is. It's now Nissan. He lent him his Datsun, and he would have used it for the day or two that it was being fixed. Now, you know that by fact, do you? As I said, my father had one holiday in 50 years of work, and it was in Clogherhead, up in County Louth, I believe. And Frank was so good to us that he let us away for that day, or for those 3 or 4 days in Clogherhead. And that was the only time I ever had a holiday with my father, ever. The rest of the time he was working. Now, Mommy couldn't be here this evening. She hasn't been well lately. She doesn't like the COVID, and she maybe found this too much. But she was as much a role of this as he was. The roles was very simple. Daddy delivered the milk and recorded the deliveries, right? But Mommy would hold the fort up on 38 Church Street, and that door never quit. Now remember, there was no milk in the shops, none. We could have been sitting in our house, the door were up to 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, and somebody with no milk for the morning, and they got 2 or 3 pints. So Mommy would meet, greet and attend the customers in 38 Church Street. Now the thing that has disappeared but you now see Tesco and all these people trying to do it, was service. There is no service anymore. I saw a Tesco ad and said, we'll see you next week, and he waved. There were a lot of people who actually bought milk and never drank it, because there was a communal aspect to this. There was actually Davy John Steele did not drink milk and he got 6 bottles a day. That is a fact. What did he feed them to, Billy? The cats. That's a fact. So she would meet and greet these people all the time. And we're going to talk about some of the people that she did meet and greet. And she would answer at the front door, as it was called in our house, whenever somebody called for milk, cream or buttermilk. And then on a Friday night, they did tallied up all the books on a Friday night. And that took, so he got home at 6 o'clock and there was maybe 4 hours of sitting doing the books. Now, who were these people that called? Well, Harry Poole actually worked up in Holland, but he also got milk up in the country. But Harry would have often called during the day. Nobody knows why, but Harry just arrived and he spent maybe half an hour juking away from Fred Hamlin, right? And he got his tea, and then he juked back up again. Mrs. Grattan next door. Now, whenever we moved back to 38, I'll tell you, Mrs. Grattan used to come in on a Tuesday. Mrs. Grattan came in on a Tuesday at 4 o'clock. She left at 6. The lady was lonely, right? We didn't mind her at all because she was a great neighbour, but she sat there for 2 hours every Tuesday. Mrs. Joe Hall across the street would have come up to my mother. According to my mother, she didn't even come up once a day, she could come up 3 times a day. She would be, I'll take a bottle of butter, I'll take a... And then people, I don't see Seamus Convery here, but Paddy Convery called. Again, Paddy lived up the road. And Brian Gibbon, does anybody remember Brian?
Yeah.
Well, Brian Gibbon used to come to our house. I'll go back up to Seamus in a minute. Don't let me go past Seamus. Brian Gibbon would come to our house and he got his tea on a Friday night. So Brian made about 3 pints of milk in the week, and he got his tea every Friday night. Brian was there for an hour. Alfie Denny, Mommy, who owns Alfie Denny's now? Mr. McLean.
Mr. Watson.
Right, Mr. Watson. Well, Alfie Denny used to come down, and my mother was delighted that Alfie Denny came down to pay for his milk every week or fortnight, because she knew all that was going on in Tannayuki. And I can remember Theresa's husband Seamus coming every Saturday night, and he was impeccably dressed, come up on a Saturday night, and he squared up his milk bill for the week. Isn't that right, Theresa? Every week, and I can remember that vividly, because I was about 10 at the time, 10 or 11. Oh, remember I said there was somebody very famous? Well, here, oh, there's daughter. Hello, daughter. Thank you. On a Saturday afternoon, whenever I was when I would have been home, the door would have rapped. And there was this young gentleman, well dressed and presentable, with a bicycle, and he had a carrier bag in the front of the bicycle, and it was William Morton. And William Morton come to our house every Saturday afternoon, and he either bought buttermilk and cream from William Morton from down the Canal Bank. So, and that, look where he is today, and we probably helped him get there. Now, sometimes my father also had a social role that was very hard to put a tag on. But my father didn't really like anybody out with him. The day before he died, I says to him, I'll be going out with you. No, you'll not. I have my own way of doing things, and you'll not go with me. Grand. So he had his own routines, he had his own place for sitting, whatever it was. But these 3 people, there's 3 stories here for these 3 people. Davy McSherry, which lived just across the street. Davy was Paddy McSherry's brother?
Yes.
Paddy McSherry's brother, and Davy would have accompanied my father, now not every day, but maybe 2 days a week, for a spin in the van wherever they were going. Davy was probably, again, we're back to this loneliness thing. Frank McSherry, a lot of you maybe could remember him. Frank took a couple of strokes and wasn't at all well, and Frank would have went with my father 2 or 3 days a week in the van just to get out of the house, Well, he did live with a down woman. Why would he not? Right? As Annie, well, my father did Frankie Detour. And here's one, well, you're going to stab me. Here's one that I came up with. Anybody remember Tommy Adams?
Yeah.
Well, Tommy come to some of the local hostelries here on a Saturday night. He maybe went years and he would have went up the road. I think Tommy would have frequented too. Not that he would have left a lot of cash behind him, but he would, right? But Tommy, what do you call the hill that Tommy lives on up there? McHugh's Hill. He lived in the top of a wee house way up a lane. But when my father was coming on a Saturday night, coming home, Tommy would have been standing at the top of to get a lift to the pass, but he would have went to Danny's and he went to Watson Dillon's and he probably went to your house, Billy, and he went to David Steele's and he would have stopped at David Steele's and Denny's, Joe Denny's, he would have went to them, and Tommy Adams' wife was a Denny, or Tommy Adams' sister was married to Denny, isn't that right, Denny? Cousin. Well, Tommy got a lift home, so Tommy had, or lift into the pass. Tommy had no car, but my father took him every Saturday night back into the pass. My father believed in everybody getting a turn. On the day he died, the police came to my mother and said, "We didn't know that your husband had a heart complaint." Well, he did have a heart attack, like, but he has no complaint, like. And she said, "He doesn't." He said, "We'll find a lot of heart tablets in the front of the van." Right? So Donald was across the street. Donald came up the street and said, "Look, Donald, I found a lot of heart tablets in the van." Yeah, Donald says he was delivering them for me. So he delivered all, like, before Boots and all did their home deliveries, my father was doing it for Donald. Mickey Waddle. My father worked for Mickey Waddle, delivered papers and groceries. He delivered the papers for Mickey Waddle up in the country. We're talking about up in the country where people rarely saw anybody else. Tom Murray in the past, I was trying to get photographs of these, but it was fruitless. Tom Murray, he used to deliver post for Tom, parcels for Tom, papers for Tom, and on some occasions, I don't think Tom drove later on in his life, he would have taken him to Portadown to the post office. Don't ask me for what, I don't know. Now, again, Griffey Wiley was a man way ahead of his time. Definitely, when you think of Griffey Wiley's shop in the 70s, he was way ahead of his time. Griffey was the front man, he had a great team behind him. My father worked for Griffey Wiley's in the 1970s. Yvonne was there, I can remember, and I can remember Harry coming in, curtain Yvonne. I should I'll not say that anymore. I'll not say anymore.
Turn it up the back end.
Oh, the McClellan would take on you, you know. You tell McClellan now. So, Griffey Wiley, my father worked for Griffey Wiley on a Thursday. The reason he would a bit of time on a Thursday evening, and on a Friday, but then he had to give that up, and Jim McVeigh took it over, and then he took over the two. And Griffey, again, being a man ahead of his time, he was the first shop in the village to sell milk. Now, he only would have sold maybe 6 or 7 pints. Now, there was nothing in it for my father, and there was nothing in it for Griffey when both of them got out of it. But Griffey was way ahead of his time. And my father put the milk into Griffey's. And the last one, again, Hamill Morrow's, when I think of all these shops, they're all gone. Hamill Morrow sold furniture and pianos, and my father had the pickup. And sometimes Hamill would ask my father to deliver furniture or a piano. Now, you're going to have a, what do you call the corner? Whitten's corner. It's not a corner anymore, it's now just a fast bend that some engineer has designed. You know the one down there where the wee woodlands is on the other side of McGaw's? Well, my father had a lovely upright piano in the back of the Morris Minor pickup. And Hamill was sitting beside my father, and my father and Hamill were going to deliver this piano. So they went round the corner, but they didn't tie the piano in. And the piano come hurtling out over the side into 1,000 pieces and was playing the whole way down the road. And Hamill never delivered that piano. Now, this is the pastoral role This is the pastoral role that my father had that then developed into the village care. Some people up in the country and some people even in towns and villages never saw anybody, never talked to anybody. He was the only personal interaction that they had at all. He took news to them, but my father, I don't think, was ever what you'd call a news merchant. He wouldn't tell anything bad about anybody. He would have took messages, maybe not everybody had phones. He might have took a message from one sister to another sister. And he would have took people's post back down to Townmurray up in the country. So if somebody was sending a letter off, he would have took it down for them. My father shared a lot of people's lives. He used to deliver milk into their fridges. Lots of people, he opened the fridge, he saw what they needed and he put it in it. He was in their house. He triumphs that they had and worries. He knew about birth. The last thing he told me was we were expecting Ben on the day he died, and he'd come to the door. He says, good news. Jared and Pauline McGill had a wee baby girl. Noella Sophia McGill. I said, are you sure you got that name right? It was actually Noella. Right? So that was the last thing he told me. He carried all these information around him. Illness and death, he would have told people who had died and who hadn't died. Links for trades. My father was a great one for getting people work within the community. Like Walter Henry that up on the road to the Carrickbrack Hills, he repaired cars. My father got Walter Henry a lot of work. Two reasons. Water, one of the work, and my father would make sure that he would send people who were reliable. There's no point in fixing a car and not getting paid for it. Ivan Honeyford also up there, up in Ugly Hills, a mechanic. William McKee, the digger man, my father, again William McKee was only a small outfit then, maybe one rubber tired JCB. My father would have got him as much work as he could. Billy Clegg, at the farm and up there as well, he would have got him. Sammy Clegg, also mechanic. And the likes of Mick Loy, I don't know how many, Harry, you remember Mick Loy? Right, you remember Mick Loy. Well, Mick Loy was one of the guys that lived up in Old Road. And Mick would have done jobs around the country for people to clean gardens and fix fences and fields, something that you can't get today. And often Mick would arrive down early in the morning and you'd see the bike going onto the back of the van and then disappearing up to maybe Marjorie Shaw's or something, and then Mick would have cycled home. And Mick's wages, again, weren't big, but he got breakfast, dinner and tea in it. So, and Mick was happy in that. This is one, again, that Philip McElroy was here. Philip McElroy and I was photographed beside Granny Waddle. Granny Waddle, who was sort of, they ran side by side with Granny Devlin competing who could be the oldest. And my father was to do with the organising of Santa Claus. But of course I knew about Santa Claus, but I didn't know who organised it. And I can remember Santa Claus coming down from the Legion down to the middle of the town here, and the seat in the back of it. And I didn't recognise Santa Claus, it was my grandfather, right? Do you remember that?
Back of the van.
In the back of the van. Do you remember early 60s? Anybody else remember that? Yeah. And we all got selection boxes. Yeah. You may remember this time, Barbara. We all got selection boxes. And that was some big thing then to get a selection box. So after that, my father was a founder member of the Village Care. And the Village Care was a cross-community organisation to help probably a very troubled Northern Ireland in the 1970s. And here we have a picture of the Village Care. Now we're just going to go down through them. I'll not say they're dead this time, Barbara. Barbara got annoyed when I said they were dead. Griff Wiley at the back, the very right.
Yeah.
Tom Taggart, John Best, Mickey Anderson. I believe that's Harry Brown. Would I be right? What do you think, Billy?
I do not.
Yes. Is that Harry Brown? He's not yelling. I'll send it down to you the next time. My father, and the legendary, as far as I'm concerned, Terry Murray. Then we have Ida Johnson,
Yeah.
Mrs. McComb down the low road, Mrs. Jim McComb,
Jing.
Jean, Nora Garvey,
Annie Martin.
no, Mrs. Melvin,
Oh, Manfred.
Mrs. Melvin, Annie Smith, help me Barbara, help me.
Oh,
Edmund Laughlin, yes, Joe Poole, and Micheál McGill. That was, I remember them meeting, I think that sometimes they met in our house, I'm really sure of it. Down the front, right, starter for 10, McLennan, you're sponsoring this, you can afford it of that one. Who's that?
How do you see the screen?
Oh, for God's sake. What age are you, McLennan? Oh, geez, you're right age now. Bertie Gibson.
okay, so it is.
One of the Lennons. Frank, did you help us in that one? There's a Joe Lennon
Yeah.
and Mrs. Joe Lennon.
Yeah.
Tom Borns. That is Tom Borns, because there's Lily Borns.
Oh, yes.
And the woman that lived across from Lily Borns, that lived in the Canal Bank, that come up.
That's John Burns.
John Borns, sorry, John Borns.
John.
And what do you call the woman that just lived across from you? Just,
Elizabeth Vane, huh?
no. She lived next door to Granny Flight.
Oh, Bridget Quinn.
Bridget Quinn. So that's in the 1970s. Again, Northern Ireland, still not much better, but Northern Ireland was a nasty place. My father, I can remember going with my father in the RUC van, right? And as I often thought, like, it's a bit dicey a Catholic in an RUC van, but my father didn't really worry too much, because he was a great believer in everybody was the same, and that's why he was in there. So he worked with the RUC around this area in the van, taking these people down to, I believe that was in the Belmont.
Yes. Yeah, so.
I believe it was in the Belmont, and the RUC minibus would have taken the people down to the Belmont, and he would have been taken. Brian, do you remember that up around your neck of the woods? It also was up and around the Summon as well, so anybody who was in that catchment area would have come. And there was roughly about 120 people went to that, if I can remember properly, because I was in the van as well. This is, again, there's a great friend of my father's, the Reverend Cyril Scott, right? If he was here, he could tell us a few stories, I can tell you. But,
Scott, Felix.
Reverend Scott, yeah?
You said Smith.
Oh, sorry. Turn the hearing aid up, Pop. The Reverend Scott, he presented in December 1981 an award to my mother for the services that my father gave to the village. So that's us all there. Tom Clark at the back. I'll just point out the dead ones. Go ahead, Clint. Now this is what Cyril Scott said, because I quoted it from the paper. His generosity and his kindness to his customers was legendary. It was dangerous to hint at or suggest anything when he was about, for the simple reason that Ben would go ahead and do it. And that is quite true. If somebody said they needed something, he made sure they had it within a couple of hours. Now, we're not doing too bad. I haven't bored people that much. I'm going to tell a couple of stories, and this one is what I call 7 pence saved. There was a lady, she's dead now, so I can't be sued for it. There was a lady who came to my father and me, and she said, "Can I buy 7 pints of milk in advance? So, I'm going to pay for them now, but I'll take them when I want them." We said, "God, God." So, she paid, it could have been 30 pence, £2.10 for the 7 pints of milk. Does anybody know why she bought the milk in advance?
Price was going up.
Correct! This man must be off the same milk. The milk was going up a penny on the following Monday, and she had bought it in advance and she saved 7 pence. Billy, you put that in the book there, that's one that you could try.
He's already tried it.
Oh, he probably has. Now the missing cream was an interesting one. I'll show you the wee shed that my father had the milk in. And every so often when we went up to the walk-in fridge, you would have read the docket and it would say there was 50 crates and 5 buttermilks and 10 creams and 10 whatever. But whenever you counted them, there was only maybe 9. So, let's see if anybody in here belonged. No. Pat Tully come to me one day and he says, tell us this, is there any cream missing in your shed? I says, well, Daddy said there was always one missing or two missing. He says, I can tell you who's taking it. He says, how do you know? He says, because I just happened to go up the road roughly at the same time, gone up Meeting Street. He says, and I see her coming out of the house. So every week, this lady went up and she took cream for herself every day. My father never charged her for it. She just got it. So that's what you're up against. There are also people in the village, whenever I lifted the milk money, it was quite strange. Like, my father usually did every street after he did it. It took 2 seconds to just jot them all down. But there were people, whenever you walked up to them, especially the ones that lived up in Hillside Crescent, there was ones that lived in Hillside Crescent, and they contained, now they said they wrote it down every day what they got, as they wrote it on the calendar in front of you. Oh, I didn't get that day. And they never paid. They never paid. But it wasn't all profit, I can tell you. 1981, am I right? Is that January 81 or January 82? Can anybody remember which year it was for the snow?
82.
82. Right. Well, January 82, I should have been talking to you earlier, Tom. January 82, there was real bad snow in early January, and I was out with my father doing the milk run in January 82, and I can remember being up at Nurse Denny's, getting up beside Billy, up at Nurse Denny's, and it was the coldest time I've ever been in my life, and it was bitterly cold, and my father nearly died that day out on the milk run, because 2 reasons. One, I was driving the van, because he always said, put that idiot in the van, he'd be happy enough, and the other thing, he got out, because we got into a snowdrift up at Nurse Denny's, he got out and he nearly perished that day. So I got him back into the van, and we decided we were going down and we're going up by Lennon Church, and we're coming along. Now there really wasn't that much snow that time, but it was a very powdery snow, and the snow blew off the fields into the roads. And I can remember coming down, it was the blue Morris Marina, and we're coming along, and woof, the world just went white. And what we had done, or what I had done, is I had driven into a snowdrift, which was 9 feet tall. And as you drove into the snowdrift, you couldn't open the doors because the snow went up the hedge and you were stuck. And my father and I climbed out through the sunroof. And lo and behold, just at that, William McKee came along with his rubber-tired digger and dug us out. What have I left, my lad?
Felix, one other memory I have been...
I was going to open to the floor. Thank you, Tom.
Your dad, when you mentioned the van and the snow, back in the 60s, the chains, you always heard them going up the pass street. He put them on about maybe December, January, and they literally stayed. That was the cold winters of the 60s, and you heard the clatter of the sparks that went up the road.
On the day he died, there was snow shortly after the day he died, and I went up to the milk house in Meeting Street, and there the chains were sitting ready to go on, you know, on a spare set of wheels. Anybody, just go back there, anybody else want to interject with a story?
Felix, you told us about the one big holiday you had. What happened when your father was sick?
Well, he was sick one evening. He was sick one evening, I can remember it about mid-80s, and he took 2 paracetamol, boiled brown lemonade, went to bed and got up the next morning. And that was it.
No sick days.
There was no sick days, none whatsoever.
I always heard my father saying he never remembered picking Bim Rafferty off the road.
No.
No.
Anybody else?
You sound like Tommy Morris stealing that tire. That was Jim.
Well, it's a wooden wheel. I think we'll forget about it, Robert. Don't push me on it. I don't have the original card.
That was Jim Pat McSherry's idea.
What was it?
Just on that, Mr. Barrow. Just on that note, Mummy, who's in the nursing home now in Newry, was talking about the very same story about 3 weeks ago.
Right.
About that very same story.
Any word of the wheel, no. Right, go ahead there, Claire. So, my father died on the 30th of December.
Felix.
Sorry.
Did you do the Seamus McGill bit?
I did, didn't I?
Yes, he did.
You did.
I did.
Yes.
You weren't in at that time, Alice.
Well dressed, yeah.
Yeah. Right, so,
Saturday night.
yeah, every Saturday night. So, and my father died coming from your father's funeral. He carried your father into the into the church, and my father was a great man because you can see why he would have been the last in and the first out.
He also came to the house that morning, I'll never forget it. He came into the room where the coffin was in our house, and he knelt down for about 15 minutes that morning as well.
Well, what happened to milk run? Well, milk runs were more or less peaked. I would say that sales were peaking in 1987, 88. The shops were starting to sell milk, and the sales were going down. So when he died, it was on the way down. So Colette and I, along with help from Oni Markin, we took over the milk run, and we did it from the 1st of January 1990 until the 19th of September 1993. I got my holidays. But I did start every morning at 3 o'clock. That was the difference that I had. I started every morning at 3 o'clock. But again, the milk run wouldn't have continued and never would have functioned without my mother. It was a two-man operation, one which was a woman. But it was a two-man operation, and we wouldn't have been able to run the milk run if it hadn't been for my mother. She looked after the children. This is one here now. So we sold it back to the creamery in the we sold it to the creamery in the 20th of November 1983 to Ronan McGuinness, and Ronan ran it for some time. Is there a milk run today? Yes. Well done. I'll have to get a cut in wages. We'll have to have a meeting after this and see how we'll have a curtail in that. There is a milkman in the area. He dies at the Blue Dale Farm in Caddy. I don't know who the gentleman is, but there is one in the area. So I hope didn't bore them that much. So I hope that you learned what my father did for the area. I hope you learned how milk business has risen and died. And that's me finished. Thank you very much.
Felix, do you remember the hens in the milk house in Mitten Street?
No, I'm not that old, Pat.
Anyway, the hens in Mitten Street, they wore glasses.
Oh, they were that. I did find some glasses earlier on. That was to stop them pecking each other, I think.
Red glasses. They were, okay.
I remember when we lived up Maiden Street in the pub, like we just, your father would just say, you know, to Molly, like the she would have been up all hours and all sorts of over there. The milk house never locked.
No.
You just went over and got milk when you wanted and got whatever, and then told them at the end
Yeah.
of the week, and I'm sure many things was forgot.
Oh,
Maybe,
sure.
you know,
Yeah.
I could remember
It was
going-
never locked.
running
Never.
over myself and getting milk or whatever was there, and, you know, taking it back. No,
You weren't the woman. You weren't the woman.
No, I don't like
She's
cream.
dead. She's dead.
I don't like cream.
Felix, what about your mother's maternity leaves?
Well, my mother's maternity leaves were very long. My mother will still claim to this day that she milked the cows with my father in the bar, more or less gave birth, and back to milking cows in the bar the next day. And also she would have been doing answering the door and all. The maternity leaves were zero.
And there's certainly no paternity leave.
No, definitely not.
Felix,
Great.
I'm sure on behalf of everybody, that was great. That was great. That really is